I dig into the wild theory of whether ancient humans actually ate their own species, it's time to uncover the truth behind this bizarre question. It sounds unthinkable, doesn't it? The idea that our earliest ancestors, the same people who painted cave walls, buried their dead, and shaped the tools of civilization, might have also consumed each other. But bones don't lie. In caves scattered across the world, England, Spain, even North America's scientists have unearthed skeletal remains of early humans, with unmistakable signs: skulls split open, marrow extracted, burn marks and cut lines that match the methods used on hunted animals. It raises a question we're almost afraid to ask. Did ancient humans eat their own kind? And if they did, was it desperation, famine, or was it ritual, a spiritual ceremony passed down for generations? Could cannibalism have been part of how some tribes processed death, or enforced power? This isn't just some horror story whispered around a campfire. This is real archaeological evidence. And the deeper you dig, the more the lines between survival, belief, and brutality start to blur. For decades, mainstream science either ignored or downplayed these discoveries. Too controversial, too grotesque, too taboo. But now, the facts are clawing their way to the surface. In this documentary, we'll take you on a journey through 800,000 years of human evil, from Neanderthal fire pits to tribal rituals in Papua New Guinea, from cut bones in medieval caves to spiritual ceremonies designed to keep the dead alive inside the living. Because to understand who we are today, we may need to look directly into the darkest chapters of our past. So I ask you again, did our ancestors really eat their own? And what does it mean if they did? There are questions so old, so uncomfortable, they whisper through time like a ghost. What if I told you that somewhere in your ancestry, maybe just beyond the branches of your family tree, someone may have tasted human flesh? No, not a monster, not a criminal, but a survivor, a priest, a mother, a warrior. It's not just a horror story, it's history, and it starts where all haunting stories begin. At the edge of firelight, the world before us, before nations, before skyscrapers, before satellites and smartphones, there were fires. Fires that warmed the living, and fires that burned the dead. And around these flames stood early humans, Homo sapiens, yes, but also Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo habilis, ancient cousins. They weren't savages. They buried their dead. They painted the walls of caves with stardust. They made tools, shared food, told stories in their own wordless way. But deep inside caves, archaeologists found more than art. They found human bones broken, scorched, butchered, not buried with honor, but cracked open like game meat. The first cannibal, in 1994, deep inside a Spanish cave known as Grand Olio, scientists unearthed a pile of bones dating back 800,000 years. Some were animal, some were human, but it's what they shared in common that shocked the world. Butcher marks, the same precise slicing seen on deer carcasses, was on human femurs. This wasn't ritual. It wasn't symbolic. This was butchery for consumption. A species known as Homo antecessor, possibly a direct ancestor of modern humans, had feasted on its own kind. Not for madness, not for evil, but maybe for survival. The science of flesh, you might wonder why. Why would anyone eat another human? Well, here's the brutal truth. Human flesh is calorically rich. A single adult human contains over 125,000 calories, enough to feed a small group for days. In harsh Ice Age conditions, when mammoths were gone, berries frozen, and the hunt failed, the dead might not have been buried. They might have been shared. A horrifying logic carved in bone. But was it always about starvation? That's where things get darker. More than hunger. Fast forward to the Neanderthals, another ancient human species, once thought brutish, now respected as intelligent, emotional, and creative. They, too, left evidence in France, in Belgium, in Croatia. In one Croatian cave, Krapanera researchers found 900 Neanderthal bones, smashed and scorched. Too many to be accidents. Too specific to ignore. Some scientists believe this was ritual cannibalism. Not just hunger, but something deeper. Was it part of a mourning rite? Was it revenge? Was it belief? We may never know, but the bones do not lie. Echoes in our DNA. Let's pull the lens back. Today, modern humans carry Neanderthal DNA. That means interbreeding. That means shared ancestry. So here's a chilling thought. If Neanderthals practiced cannibalism, and we carry their blood, how far removed are we really? This isn't about judgment. It's about understanding the full spectrum of human behavior, even the part we're too ashamed to teach in schools. Because before we were modern, we were desperate. The silence of history for centuries. History books avoided this. Too grotesque, too taboo, too unchristian. But archaeology doesn't care about comfort. It only cares about truth. And the truth is, cannibalism was part of our human story. Not everywhere, not all the time, but enough to matter. Enough to leave marks on bones, stories in tribal memory, and symbols in ancient art. It was in the caves. It was in the jungles. And yes, it was even in some temples. So what now? So now we ask the question together. What does it mean that ancient humans ate their own? Does it make them monsters? Or does it make them survivors? When we strip away our modern comforts, our delivery apps, our heating systems, our societal rules, what we become? History isn't here to scare us. It's here to remind us. Remind us that even the darkest parts of ourselves have roots. Roots that lead right back to us. We've only just scratched the surface. The bones we've unearthed. The questions they raise. They whisper of a past we weren't taught. So now, I ask you, if the evidence is real, if our ancestors truly consumed their own, what does that say about us? Tell me what you believe in the comments below. Was it hunger, ritual, or something we still don't understand? And if this chapter pulled you into the shadows of human history, then don't stop here about cannibalism, because the answers don't lie in books. They lie in bone. Subscribe to uncover more truths buried beneath time. Comment, share, and stay curious. The story's just beginning. If you're like most people, when you hear the word cannibalism, you imagine desperation, a freezing mountain pass, starvation so deep that morality breaks. But what if it wasn't just about hunger? What if, some early humans consumed their dead willingly? Not because they had to, but because they believed it was sacred. This is where our story takes a darker, stranger turn away from desperation and into devotion. We now enter the realm of ritual cannibalism. The dead are not gone. They're just changing. In many tribal societies across ancient history, death wasn't seen as an end. It was a transition, a transformation, and the body of the deceased, it wasn't waste. It was power. To consume flesh was to absorb the soul, the memory, the wisdom, the essence of a person. Across millennia, across continents, different groups practiced some form of ritual cannibalism. The Wari people of the Amazon, who saw burial as disrespectful but eating the body as a final act of love. Papua New Guinea's for tribe, who honored the dead by ingesting their mothers, eating their children to keep them close spiritually. The ancient Aztecs, who captured enemies in war, offered them to the gods, and consumed parts of their bodies in religious festivals. Ancestral pueblos in the American Southwest, where bones burned in ceremonial pits, have puzzled archaeologists for decades. What do all of these cultures have in common? They believed the act wasn't monstrous. It was meaningful. Bones don't just break, they speak. Let's go back to Gough's Cave, England, roughly 15,000 years ago. Someone, perhaps an entire group, used human skulls as cups. They weren't cracked in panic. They were cleaned, polished, smoothed at the edges. Arms and legs were stripped of meat with precision. Bone marrow was harvested. Other animal remains were treated the same way. And most curiously, there were no signs of violence, no massacre, no trauma, just ... deliberate and ritual precision. This wasn't butchery, it was ceremony. When anthropologists discovered these sites, they didn't immediately jump to conclusions. After all, the idea of ritual cannibalism is hard to accept even today. But there's a pattern. No signs of warfare, no famine in the soil layers, systematic cuts on specific bones, specially skulls, ribs, femurs, ash, pigments, and sacred objects near the remains. These weren't crimes, these were customs. The mind behind the meat. Why would a human choose to eat another? Outside of desperation, there are three dominant theories that emerge across cultural studies. 1. Eating the dead to honor them, consumed only from within the tribe out of grief, love, remembrance, a funeral rite to keep the spirit close. 2. Exocannibalism. Eating enemies to conquer them, done in warfare or victory, to absorb strength, to desecrate foes. Meat became power, flesh became domination. 3. Shamanic cannibalism. Spiritual transference, guided by ritual leaders or spiritual beliefs, often involving trance or hallucinogens. Not about taste but transcendence. In each case, the act was more than survival. It was story, it was identity. Human remains as sacred objects. In many places, skulls were not hidden. They were displayed, painted, carved, used as bowls or masks. Bones weren't buried but worn, sometimes as in Neolithic Turkey. At the site of Cataluk, plastered human skulls were found inside homes. Imagine the story passed down. Your grandfather's spirit protects the house. His bones warm the fire. Today we recoil at the thought, but 5,000 years ago, it was part of the cycle of life and death, the line between sacred and savage. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. The more we explore these rituals, the harder it becomes to judge them through modern eyes. When cannibalism was cultural, it wasn't shocking, it was expected, and those who didn't participate, sometimes they were considered outcasts, the disrespectful, the cold-hearted, the forgetful of the dead. In those societies, not eating the dead could be more taboo than doing it. So who are we to judge? Are we modern ... or simply disconnected? We often ask what separates us from animals. But maybe the real question is what ancient beliefs still live in us today. Are we really so different from those who sat around fires and told stories through ritual and ash? The next time you see a burial ... a grey, an urn, remember. In another time, in another world, the final act of love might have been a meal. There is a kind of cold that goes deeper than skin. It seeps into the bones. It silences the birds, it stops the rivers, and in that silence only hunger remains. Now, imagine that hunger lasting for days, then weeks. The snow falls heavier, the firewood runs out, and the people around you are no longer just people. They're meat, and the mind begins to crack. This is survival cannibalism, the darkest corner of human resilience. And it's not ancient folklore. It's real. It's recorded, and it's happened more times than we like to admit. Desperation across time survival. Cannibalism is not ceremonial. It's not religious. It's primal. It's the final, unthinkable choice. In the face of extinction. In ice age, in stranded shipwrecks, in war-torn cities, and lifeless desert humans have eaten each other to stay alive. Let's go back, roughly 12,000 years ago, as the ice age thawed and temperatures shifted violently. Early humans were trapped in unforgiving terrain. Archaeological digs in Belgium revealed evidence of butchered human bones dated to this exact period. The bones were mixed with animal remains, processed the same way. No care, no burial, just consumption. This wasn't ritual. It wasn't honor. It was starvation, plain and merciless. Even today, scientists debate whether this was occasional or systemic. The case of the Donner Party. Fast forward to 1846. A group of American pioneers, the Donner Party, sets out for California. They become trapped in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Snowed in. Supplies gone. No help. Weeks pass. Children begin to die. And the living begin to change. They eat their shoes first. Then animal hides. Then bark. Then each other. Testimonies from survivors confirmed what the bones later proved. They had crossed the line. Some did it in shame. Others did it without emotion. Because hunger doesn't care about taboos. It just eats. The Andes flight disaster. In 1972, a plane carrying a Uruguayan rugby team crashed in the Andes Mountains. Out of 45 passengers, 16 survived. How? They made a collective decision to eat the bodies of their friends who had died in the crash. There were no plants, no animals, no rescue in sight, only ice and frozen flesh. Some prayed before they ate, some cried, others simply acted. It took 72 days before they were found. When the world heard their story, outrage erupted. But eventually, the tone shifted from horror to awe, because people saw what the will to survive really meant. Sieges and starvation in World War II. During the siege of Leningrad, citizens starved for over 2 years. Bread was made from wallpaper paste and sawdust, and yet cannibalism occurred. Quietly, secretly, authorities arrested hundreds for eating corpses dug from graves. Not because they were monsters, but because there was nothing else. One woman wrote in her diary, "I fed my son my husband's thigh. I cried the entire time." That's not horror fiction. That's history. What happens in the brain? Scientists have studied what happens during prolonged starvation. When a body is deprived of calories for more than 20 to 30 days, the following begins. Muscle tissue is consumed. Vision blurs. Cognitive control declines. The brain reverts to primal decision-making. At a certain point, morality becomes a luxury the body can't afford. This isn't a flaw. It's biology. The will to live overrides everything, even empathy. What survival cannibalism tells us about ourselves? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Given the right conditions, anyone is capable of it. You, me, all of us. Cannibalism isn't the act of the insane. It's the act of the desperate. And often, those who commit it never fully return to who they were before. The people who endured these situations weren't evil. They weren't villains. They were survivors, broken, changed, haunted. And the question isn't just, would you do it? It's, could you live with yourself afterward? In every era, war redefines the rules. It bends morality. It blurs lines between civilization and savagery. And in the fog of battle, even the most primal taboos can become tactics. You've seen cannibalism as ritual. You've heard it used in desperation. But what if it was used not to survive, but to conquer? This is the chapter where eating the enemy wasn't a last resort. It was a message, a declaration of dominance, of terror, of power. The mouth as a weapon in the eyes of ancient warriors. Consuming your enemy wasn't just a physical act, it was psychological warfare. To eat the flesh of a defeated foe was to steal their strength, to defile their soul, to send a warning. This is what happens when you cross us. This is not myth. This is not legend. This is documented warfare from the jungles of New Guinea to the blood-soaked temples of Mesoamerica. The Aztec Empire, feast of the fallen. The Aztecs were no strangers to violence. Their empire was forged through conquest and sustained through ritual blood, but buried within their religious festivals was a much darker practice. Ritualistic captives taken in war were not simply executed. They were displayed, paraded, and then sacrificed in front of massive crowds atop towering pyramids. After their hearts were cut out and offered to the gods, their bodies were boiled, flayed, and consumed by priests and warriors. This wasn't about famine. It was about fear and control. Spanish conquistadors who witnessed these acts wrote in stunned horror, "They say the body was eaten like venison." While some scholars argue the reports were exaggerated propaganda, archaeological remains, charred bones, ceremonial utensils tell a story that aligns too well with the writings. The Aztecs weren't just honoring gods, they were weaponizing flesh. Papua New Guinea, vengeance on a plate. In the highlands of Papua New Guinea, tribes like the Korowai and Asmat believed eating an enemy wasn't just vengeance, it was justice. When a tribal warrior was killed, his family would track down the killer and eat his liver. Not for protein, but to cleanse dishonor, to show that grief could become dominance. In some cases, the warrior's bones were carved into daggers or necklaces, symbols of victory worn with pride. The act sent a message through the jungle. We do not forgive, we do not forget, and we do not waste revenge. The Congo Wars. The cannibal commanders now shift forward to the 1990s. In the chaos of the Congo civil wars, reports began surfacing of rebel factions engaging in acts of cannibalism not as necessity, but as psychological warfare. Journalists and aid workers uncovered first-hand accounts of militia leaders consuming the hearts or organs of enemies in front of prisoners or civilians. These weren't starving men, they were sending a signal. We're not just your rulers, we're your nightmares. While some accounts were denied or blurred by politics, the symbolism remains chilling. Modern war still awakens ancient darkness. Europe wasn't immune. Even medieval Europe has blood on its hands. In the siege of Mara in 1098, Crusaders starved after months of brutal fighting. When they finally took the city, they butchered the Muslim defenders and, reportedly, ate their bodies. Chronicles of the First Crusade record one night writing, "Our men boiled pagan adults in they impaled children on spits and devoured them grilled." Whether these accounts were literal or metaphorical is debated, but the message was the same. Fear us, we are unstoppable. We will eat your world. Why cannibalism becomes strategy? So why has war-driven cannibalism appeared across civilizations? Historians and psychologists suggest 5 reasons. Dehumanization. Turn the enemy into meat. Strip them of dignity. Intimidation. Shock rivals into submission through horror. Absorption of power. Superstitious belief in gaining strength from the dead. Domination. Public humiliation through desecration. Group bonding. Reinforcing loyalty through shared acts of taboo. In war, the enemy becomes other, and the greater the fear, the easier the flesh is consumed. The dark mirror. What makes this chapter so disturbing is not just the acts themselves, but the fact that they worked. Empires grew. Tribes ruled. Fear spread faster than fire. And when cannibalism became strategy, it wasn't a breakdown of civilization. It was a tool of it. You may want to believe that such darkness is behind us, that modern humanity has evolved past the hunger for power through blood. But the truth is, we haven't. We've only dressed it differently. When war strips away laws and masks, the ancient hunger returns. What if I told you that to touch the divine, some believed they had to taste death? That for centuries, across continents, civilizations offered up not just prayer, but flesh. This is where belief and blood collide. You've seen cannibalism born from survival. You've seen it wielded as a weapon. But now, we enter sacred ground, where the line between man and God was drawn in bone marrow, where eating human flesh was not sin, but sacrament. Sacrifice and the sacred meal for many ancient cultures. Sacrifice wasn't just about appeasing the gods, it was about participating in them. To consume what was once human was to consume something more. Power, spirit, favor. It was a religious exchange. Take life, give life. The Aztec connection. We return to Tenochtitlan, the heart of the Aztec Empire. Here, ritual sacrifice wasn't cruelty, it was cosmology. The sun needed blood, the gods needed nourishment, and humans, they were the harvest. Victims, often prisoners of war, were offered on stone altars. Hearts were torn from chests while still beating raised skyward in reverence. But the ritual didn't end with the death. Priests and warriors would consume the limbs of the sacrificed. Not gluttonously but ceremonially. They believed eating the flesh brought them closer to the gods, closer to the divine order. The ritual meal was called Tlacatloli, meaning sacred maize with man. This was no savage frenzy. It was religion, the Celts, and the heart of the brave. Even in ancient Celtic Europe, the ritual of consuming human flesh had its spiritual logic. Warriors sometimes ate the hearts of the fallen, not just as a show of strength, but to take in the essence of courage, bravery, and honor. Roman sources wrote of druidic ceremonies involving ritual death, possibly including consumption of parts. Were these real accounts or Roman exaggerations? Archaeological evidence got marks, burnt bones, buried human remains among feasting pits suggests some truth lingers in the myth. Fire and flesh in the Pacific, in Fiji, Tonga, and parts of Polynesia, cannibalism was tied to both gods and social order. High-ranking priests oversaw the process. Enemies of the tribe, especially those seen as spiritually impure or dishonorable, were ritually slain, and sometimes the chief himself partook, not as a show of appetite, but authority. To ingest the transgressor was to balance the cosmic scale. This wasn't about hunger, it was about cleansing the world. Christian echo. Now here's the twist that makes many uncomfortable. Even Christianity, one of the world's most practiced religions, carries a symbolic echo of this ancient rite. The Eucharist, the body and blood of Christ. Take, eat, this is my body. Drink, for this is my blood. While symbolic in modern liturgy, early Christian outsiders, Romans and Greeks, accused them of cannibalism. They whispered of secret meetings, of consuming their God, of sacred blood drinking. Of course, the practice was symbolic, but it reveals a deeper truth. The idea of gaining divine favor through flesh and blood runs deep in human history. Why faith consumed flesh, so why would people of faith turn to cannibalism? Anthropologists offer three core insights. Sacred participation, to share in the divine sacrifice, literally and physically. Spiritual absorption, belief that the qualities of the consumed would pass into the eat, balance and reciprocity, to repay the gods in kind, to feed them what they gave us. Across Africa, Asia, the Americas cultures embraced these rituals, not because they were evil, but because they were devout. The thin line between God and hunger, the horror is not that people once consumed human flesh. The horror is that they believed it was holy. They prayed before the act, they wept after the act, and then they believed they were purified. In temples, in jungles, in deserts across eras we see the same pattern: kill, consume, transcend. It's not madness, it's myth made real. The gods we create say more about us than about the heavens. And when those gods demanded flesh, we gave it, not in fear, but in faith. We lock our doors at night, not just to keep the world out, but to keep the stories in, because deep down, every culture has one. A tale of the man who eats men, or the woman who lures, then devours. The beast that walks like us, talks like us but lives on flesh. Cannibalism lives in our history, yes, but it thrives in our imagination. Welcome to the darkest mirror of our minds, where ancient truths become bedtime stories, and horror isn't in what we see, but what we know could be real. The vampire, blood and immortality. Let's begin with a familiar face. The vampire, elegant, alluring, deadly, but behind the cape and charisma lies the oldest fear: being consumed. While modern vampires drink blood with charm, the original legends were far more primal. Eastern European tales told of revenants and dead corpses that dug themselves out of graves to drink the blood of family members, not to seduce, but to feed. Some versions described them biting flesh, draining marrow, or eating organs under moonlight. And it wasn't fiction. Villagers exhumed bodies, staked corpses, buried them face down, or severed heads to stop them from feeding. In a time where death was mysterious and disease was rampant, cannibalism myths explained the unexplainable. Wendigos and the winter curse in the frozen forests of North America. Indigenous Algonquian tribes spoke of a creature more terrifying than any beast. The Wendigo. It was once a man, but hunger twisted him, turned him into a monster that fed on human flesh, growing taller, hungrier, colder with every bite. The Wendigo is the embodiment of cannibalistic greed. It's not just horror, it's warning. If you eat your kin, if you betray your people for meat, you become something less than human. Even today, some Cree elders won't speak its name out loud, because the Wendigo isn't just a story, it's a spiritual disease. And that chill down your spine, that's its shadow. Hansel, Gretel, and the oven. Now let's enter the nursery. Hansel and Gretel, a tale we've all heard. Children lost in the woods. A house made of candy. A sweet old lady with a secret recipe for roast child. But dig deeper, and you'll find echoes of famine-era Europe, where starvation led to abandonment, and sometimes worse. Grimm's fairy tales weren't fantasies. They were cultural warnings. Don't wander far. Don't trust strangers. And remember, even kindness can hide hunger. The witch wasn't evil because she was ugly. She was evil because she ate what should never be eaten. Tales from Africa, Asia, and the Amazon across the world. Folklore has woven cannibalism into its most enduring stories. In West African tales, demons called Azaman fed on blood by night. In India, the flesh-eating Rakshasa took human form to deceive their victims. The Yanomami of the Amazon told tales of sky spirits who feasted on human souls, and sometimes their cannibals weren't just villains. They were tests. Tests of our morality, our hunger, our humanity. The psychology of the cannibal myth why do these stories persist? Psychologists say the answer is simple. Cannibalism is the ultimate taboo, so we wrap it in metaphor, dress it as folklore, retell it as myth. We fear losing control, becoming beasts, being devoured by what should never devour us, and every story whispers the same thing. This is what happens when you lose yourself. Modern horror. Cannibals on screen, from The Silence of the Lambs to The Hills Have Eyes. Hollywood has made sure we never forget. Why do we flock to these films? Why do we watch ... knowing what's coming? Because we're not afraid of monsters. We're afraid of the human that becomes one. In the shadows, in secret, for hunger or for pleasure. A story older than words. What's chilling is this. The myth of the cannibal is older than written language. It appears in rock paintings, in oral traditions, passed down for millennia, in carvings, in cave drawings, in hushed warnings, whispered around fires. Before we knew how to build cities, we knew what happened when a man ate another man, and we never stopped telling that story. Stories help us survive. They keep our children safe. They remind us where the edge is, so we never fall off it. But sometimes we look over that edge, we stare into the abyss, and in it we see ourselves. You'd think it ended with the ancients. You'd think cannibalism was buried in bones, burned in temples, sealed in stone. But what if I told you it never left? What if, beneath the surface of our civilized world, circus hunger still breathes? Tonight, we pull back the curtain on modern cannibalism, not in legend, but in fact. This isn't mythology. This isn't horror fiction. This is real. The flesh economy. A market of shadows, somewhere in the hidden corridors of the deep web. There are whispers forums where meat has a new definition. Posts in code, listings of long pig, disturbing recipes, disguised as performance art, claims of private tasting parties in abandoned places. Many say it's trolling, others say it's fake, but occasionally law enforcement uncovers something real. In 2012, German police arrested Armin Mavis, known to tabloids as the Rotenburg cannibal. He didn't kidnap his victim. He posted an ad online, looking for a man willing to be eaten. And someone replied, willingly. The two met, recorded the entire thing, and Maves killed and ate the man over several days. Not out of hunger, out of consent. In court, he was calm, rational, articulate. He believed what he did was sacred, personal. What do we do with that? Cannibalism and the dark web. Investigators say the dark web occasionally uncovers disturbing traces of cannibalistic subcultures. Online forums, role-play graphic human feasts. Fetish communities exchange recipes that, while fictional, border on obsessive. Some claim to share taste tests, animal parts carved and prepared to simulate human flesh. Some say it's performance art. Others say it's a cry for help. But sometimes the lines blur. Digital forensics teams have tracked real missing persons cases that crossed paths with these sites. Is it always cannibalism? No. But when the worst happens, it often starts here. The science of modern Now, let's talk about a medical mystery. Kuru. It's a disease discovered in the 20th century among the Fore people of Papua New Guinea, where ritual cannibalism was once practiced. To honor the dead, women and children would consume the bodies of relatives. But something spread. Kuru, caused by prions, malformed proteins, attacked the brain. Symptoms included tremors, hallucinations, and uncontrollable laughter before death. A horrifying fate, directly linked to human consumption. Even decades after the practice stopped, the disease lingered, a warning from nature itself. Eat your own kind, and it will consume you. Urban cannibals. When horror wears a face sometimes, Cannibalism doesn't need ceremony or secrecy. Sometimes it wears everyday skin. In 1981, in Milwaukee, Jeffrey Dahmer lured young men to his apartment. What followed was necrophilia, murder, and cannibalism. Human heads stored in refrigerators, hearts cooked and eaten. In 2012, in Miami, a man high on synthetic drugs dubbed the Miami Zombie attacked a homeless man and began eating his face in broad daylight. In Russia, dozens of chilling cases have surfaced, including Natalia who with her husband allegedly killed and consumed parts of over a dozen people and photographed the meals. The monsters, they looked like you and me. No ancient curse, no divine ritual, just darkness pure and personal. What society doesn't want to talk about? Why is cannibalism so rare but so unforgettable? Because it violates the final taboo. Murder is one thing, desecration is another, but to consume the flesh of another is to erase the boundary between human and beast. It's a violation of identity, of the sacred self. That's why we obsess over it. Why movies, podcasts, documentaries return to it again and again. It's the one sin we're too afraid to look at directly, but can't stop watching. The fetish versus the crime. In modern psychology, there are patients, yes, real patients who confess to cannibalistic fantasies. They say it's not about violence, it's about dominance, intimacy, power. Therapists don't dismiss it. They study it, because if we don't understand where these impulses come from, we risk meeting them in the dark. Why does cannibalism still exist? Despite all our progress, cannibalism keeps returning. Why? Anthropologists suggest several reasons. Control. When society collapses, the ultimate form of control is consumption, ritual, and power. Even in secular settings, cannibalism becomes a twisted performance of dominance. Mental illness. For some, it's delusion. For others, it's untreated compulsion. Curiosity gone mad. A human instinct taken to its unthinkable extreme. The taboo that lives. We live in a world of smart tech, virtual reality, space travel, and yet, this ancient hunger whispers. In courtrooms, in confessionals, in the deepest parts of the internet, we want to believe we've evolved. But somewhere out there, someone is asking, what does human taste like? Cannibalism never left, it just changed masks. And when we pretend it's gone, that's when it hides best. War tests the limits of nations. But famine tests the limits of humanity. When every rule collapses, when order, law, and even food vanish, what remains is survival. And in the darkest corners of history, survival took a horrifying shape. Cannibalism, not legend, not fiction, recorded, documented, witnessed. This is the reality of humans eating humans. During humanity's greatest breakdowns, the siege of Leningrad, 872 days. How long Nazi Germany laid siege to the Soviet city of Leningrad during World War II. The city was starved, frozen, temperatures plunged below -30 degrees Celsius. Bread rations dropped to less than 125 grams per day. Pets vanished. Wallpaper paste was boiled for glue. And then came the rumors. Then, the arrests. Over 2,000 cases of cannibalism were officially investigated by Soviet authorities during the siege. Mothers killing children, strangers hunting neighbors, desperation that destroyed the soul long before the body. And yet they survived. Not all, but enough. Some by love, some by faith, and some by flesh. Unit 731. Japan's war crimes in China. This one isn't just about survival. It's about cruelty. In 1930s and 40s, China, Japanese military scientists from Unit 731 conducted gruesome experiments on civilians' biological weapons, amputations without anesthesia, and yes, cannibalism. Reports state that soldiers consumed livers, hearts, and other organs from prisoners, sometimes alive, under the guise of medical science. The goal wasn't survival, it was power, dehumanization, total domination. This wasn't war, it was hell with a flag, and history must not forget it. The Soviet famine of 1932-33 in Ukraine. Under Stalin's forced collectivization, millions starved in what many call an engineered famine. Grain was taken, fields were stripped. Winter came and the bodies fell. Eyewitnesses tell of children disappearing from villages, of mothers selling their last belongings to escape, of neighbors becoming predators. Soviet files reveal cannibalism was widespread, punishable by death. Yes, but practiced nonetheless. People ate corpses, some killed to eat. And most horrifying of all, some sold human meat on the black market, labeled as pork. When policy becomes starvation, people lose more than life, they lose their humanity. The Donner Party, let's bring it home to the United States. In 1846, a group of pioneers headed west toward California. They took a shortcut. They got trapped in the Sierra Nevada mountains by heavy snow, 87 people. Weeks passed, supplies ran out, they ate animals, then leather, bark, and then each other. By the time rescuers arrived, only 48 survived. Bones were scattered in makeshift camps. The event scarred American memory. But it wasn't just about death. It was about what happens when dreams die first, when civilization crumbles in the cold. North Korea's Great Famine in the 1990s. North Korea experienced a devastating famine. Estimates suggest over 2 million people died, and in the shadows of that disaster, refugees reported acts of cannibalism, stories of starving families, desperate choices, and hidden burials. International investigators couldn't verify everything, but the pattern was clear. When a regime fails its people, the unspeakable becomes the only option left. And the victims, they aren't criminals, they're reminders of how close we all stand to the edge of desperation. How far would you go? Let's ask the hardest question. If your child was dying, if your family was starving, if there was nothing else, what would you do? We all want to believe we'd never do it, that we'd choose death over the unspeakable, but history tells us some chose life, even when that life came at the cost of another. And the truth is, you don't know what you'd do until you're holding the knife. We've traveled across millennia, from caves and rituals, to cities and screens, from myth to evidence. And after all of it, we're still asking the same question. How could they? How could humans eat their own? But maybe the better question is, why do we care so deeply? Cannibalism is more than a taboo. It's a mirror, a terrifying reflection of what we could become in fear, in hunger, in madness. The human paradox: we are the only species that records its history, the only one that tells stories to warn its children, and yet we are also the only species that wonders. How close are we to becoming our worst selves? Because if we understand our darkness, we can resist it, and if we don't, then maybe we're not as far from the fire as we think. We learned that cannibalism was real. It existed across continents, cultures, and time. Sometimes it was spiritual, sometimes criminal, sometimes desperate. But always it left a scar in our stories, our legends, our fears, and that scar whispers, don't go back. If this journey made you think, question, or even feel uncomfortable, That's exactly the point. Because history isn't about comfort, it's about truth. Now it's your turn. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. What do you believe? Myth or reality? And if you're ready to go deeper into humanity's darkest corners, watch our next video on the cults that ate their own. Subscribe, share, stay curious, because the past isn't dead. It's just buried.